We are speaking in English because we have English-speaking guests, but they are online. So shalom to all participants here and online. I'm pleased to finally open the Dan David International Conference of 2024. The School of Historical Studies is as ever grateful to the Dan David Foundation for its support that enabled us to have this meeting. As you can imagine, it has not been an easy task to organize an international conference these days, holding on to some reminder of optimism, as I guess somewhat naively, we all hope that by this time of 2024, we will be able to host our distinguished overseas participant. But unfortunately, finally, we had to go hybrid. Nevertheless, I still hope that we are going to have an exciting, thought-provoking, and critical conversation in the next 2.5 days about a timely theme as we will converse and argue about democracy, authoritarianism, and that which is in between. I invite Professor Ariel Porat, the president of Tel Aviv University and the former dean of the Faculty of Law, who has been courageously vocal about the recent processes of de-democratization in Israel, for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Ofra, and welcome all of you, including those people coming from, I would like to say, from outside of the country, but outside of Tel Aviv. It's good to see you all here. Even coming from Jerusalem might be a kind of a risk that people don't want to take. So needless to say that the topic is, well, what a coincidence. You chose a topic which is so relevant here, and I'm sure it's a coincidence. So with your permission, I would like to say a few words about the current situation and how it relates to the topic of today's symposium. I'm sure that all of you know we are in a kind of a regime revolution that seems to go slowly, but indeed it's not so slowly, but it is done in kind of an incremental way. And sometimes it's hard to focus on a specific act. Nevertheless, when you look to the entire scope of activities done by the government in recent years, it's really revolution. Some would say coup, whatever you want, whatever term you want to use. It's something that should be and is very troubling for many of us. What I want to do now in just a few minutes to point out three, I would call them mega events that might occur in the next maybe couple of months. And if any of those events really takes place, I think that should be a real alarm that we couldn't and shouldn't stand by and do whatever we can to not let it happen. What we can do, it's not just about universities. I think it's generally about public figures, about people that have influence. I think that at the minimum, those people, including myself, should go into strike, go to protest against the government and call others to follow those steps. And here are the three mega events that I think should trigger such a reaction. Now, this is not kind of an exhaustive, you could think of other mega events, but I would like to focus on three. So the first one, which is quite obvious, this is the potential or the possible dismissal or firing of the Attorney General. As you know, recently the government have tried to normalize the idea that the Attorney General might be removed. Now, it's not the same thing as removing, say, Gallant. I think that even removing Gallant, it's more than problematic, but it's not at the same scale. It's something else. First of all, the Attorney General is a civil servant. It's not a politician. She does what she should do, which is to be maybe the most important gatekeeper in our legal and in our legal regime, and dismissing a civil servant, a very brave and professional civil servant, who is also the gatekeeper these days, is something that we shouldn't let it go. It shouldn't happen under any circumstances. Removing the Attorney General, it's like removing the guard of the rule of law. It's like the government putting itself behind the law. As if these are the checks and balances which are so critical, which makes the difference between a democracy and a dictatorship. And that's one event that we should take very seriously if it takes place. The second event, which is a little bit less natural to think about it as a mega event, is the dismissal of the head of the security service, Rosh HaShabak. And on the one hand, the head of the secret service is one of the people responsible for the disaster of October 7. And definitely, he also took responsibility. Maybe among the first people that took responsibility for the disaster was the head of the Shabak, the security service. But if he is fired, dismissed by the government, actually there are two problems here. The first one, which seems to be a little bit more technical, the second one is more substantive. So the first one is that it's just impossible that the government, who is the primary responsible entity, not only entity, also the prime minister and the other ministers, who are at least ministerially responsible for the disaster of October 7, would fire other people while they still holding their positions. This is a situation that is intolerable. But more importantly, the head of the Shabak, the head of the Secret Service, became, quite ironically, a kind of a gatekeeper and one of the most important people protecting, as I said, it's kind of ironic, the most important people who protect us, citizens, from the power of the government. From more than once, he refused to expand the authority of the Shabak also, inside Israel to activities which are not exactly combating terrorism. He was the one reminding you that before October 7 warned us all, including the government, that the terrible social crisis in Israel creates a real danger, a real external risk. So he was among the first to say so very bravely. And after October 7, he more than once criticized the government, in particular the Minister of National Security, for initiating tension in the territories in Judea and Samaria, in East Jerusalem. He also was very critical about the activity of the police under the influence of Ben-Gvir, the Minister of National Security. And he's a professional. He's not a politician. And he does what he thinks right to do as a guardian or as a trustee of the people in Israel, not of the government. He understands very well what he should do. And if he is removed, there is a very kind of a huge risk that the reason for the government to remove him is in order to replace him from someone who would be kind of a political appointment that would serve the interests of the government instead of the country. And I would predict that very quickly, if such move would be taken and if he would be replaced by another political appointment, it's quite possible that the Shabak, the security service, would go after people who are opposing the government instead of people that create risks to us citizens. And people like me and many of the people like, we might be arrested, detained, or whatever, and we don't want it to happen. So that's maybe sounds a kind of an exaggeration of, but I don't think that it's impossible that it would happen. And the only reason for the government to remove Ronen Bar, the head of the security service, is exactly for that, to replace him with political appointments. Otherwise, they won't do it. The third mega event, so far 2 mega events, dismissal of Attorney General and then dismissal of the head of the Shabak, the head of the security service. The third one is, sometimes we call it a constitutional crisis, but to put it in less technical terms, this is the situation when the government refuses to obey decision of the courts, in particular of the Supreme Court. You know that I think about more than a month ago, the Supreme Court ordered the Minister of Justice to convene the committee the committee for the appointment committee of judges, which one of its tasks is to appoint the next president, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. For more than a year, there is no head of the Supreme Court, there is no Chief Justice. And this is not something technical. It's really very problematic. The Chief Justice is not a kind of a formal appointment that he would kind of out of respect or honor to someone. It's not a formal. It has a lot of authorities which are extremely important, especially these days. And the situation that the Minister of Justice refuses to convene the committee knowing that he doesn't have majority in that committee. And this is the only reason why not to convene it. This is I am telling you as a law professor, it's a clear-cut case. It's not a kind of a very complicated situation. When somebody has power and authority and he heads a committee, he couldn't abuse it by not convening the committee just because he doesn't have majority in that committee. And indeed, the Supreme Court ordered him to convene the committee. We don't know yet whether he would do it or not. He's trying to, to navigate. And I couldn't say at the moment that he, straightforwardly refused to do so, but it could happen. If it happens, this is a situation that we shouldn't tolerate. Or think about something that could also bring into a very challenging situation. So you know that at the moment there are several petitions, pleas to the Supreme Court against the Ben-Gvir, arguing that he is not, because of his repeat infringements of the Pkudat HaMishtara, the police order, the police law, he should removed because he break the law like on a daily basis. It's true that it's not a criminal behavior. There is, nobody thought about it, that sometimes a minister that does not comply with or does infringe the law which authorizes him to use his powers, if he disobeys or infringes, committed a criminal crime. So this is not the situation. But think about a minister that repeatedly and for so long time totally ignore the law which gives him authority. And so in my view, it's a reasonable argument. I don't want to go into the details of the legal argument, but it's not like out of the blue skies, to say that that person should be dismissed. But suppose the court decide that he should be removed and the prime minister ignores it. I think this is something that we should never tolerate. And you could think about some other examples in which the court decides X and the government totally refuses to obey the court decisions. If you remember, more than a year ago, during the legal reform, the prime minister was interviewed several times, mostly in foreign media, and he have said several times when he was asked what happens if the Supreme Court would strike down some of the laws enacted by the Knesset, and then he said, well, let's see what they, he didn't say explicitly what you expect prime minister to say, yes, we would obey the law. Not obeying the law, and just for those of you who are not lawyers, which is probably most of you, in any democracy, the ultimate interpreter of the law is the court, the Supreme Court. And a government that refuses to obey the decision of the Supreme Court put it itself above the law. It means that they are unlimited in their powers. They could do whatever they like. The court could issue orders and they would ignore. This is really breaking the rules of the game. And in many respects, it's more serious than any other infringements of, because if the government wants to advance a specific law that we think that it's terrible, etc., still they should go to the Knesset, and after the Knesset, it could and should go to the Supreme Court. And as long as we play according to the rules of the game, we could tolerate it. But once the rules of the game themselves are broken, that's really the end of democracy. That might lead into a civil war. So these are, very briefly, three mega events that if they occur, I think that we should not stand by, we should not tolerate it. And as I said before, it including university presidents, but not only them. I think that all people who have influence, like public officials and definitely university presidents, but many others, everybody who has influence on some other people should speak up, say very clearly that that is intolerable, should go into a strike, demonstrate protest against the government, and call others to follow their steps. It's not exactly about what we call ashbata, when you try to say close the university, which have been proven to be not an effective tool, because after 4 hours the labor court would issue an injunction, and in assuming that we don't want to break the law, this becomes kind of an ineffective tool. But when it comes to kind of a personal strike, like I declare that I'm not going to come to the university, it could be for days, for weeks, or that's a secondary question, an important one, and also call others to follow my steps. This is different, and I believe that it might be kind of an effective tool. So we are in a very crucial junction. Be on alert, and let's hope that those three mega events wouldn't take place, but I won't be surprised if I'm wrong about that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Ariel Porat, for your stimulating and very significant and worrisome words. For us at the School of Historical Studies, Mr. Ariel David is much more than a distinguished board, a member of the Dan David Foundation that supports this conference and other activities of our school. We see him as a close supporter and a friend of the school, and I invite Mr. David to say some words. Ken.
Hi, Ofra. Thank you. Professor Ariel Porat, President of Tel Aviv University, Professor Gali Cinamon, Dean of the Humanities, Professor Ofra, Goldstein-Gidoni, Head of the School of History, dear speakers and guests, thank you for hosting me here. And sorry, I have an invasion by my daughter. Okay, fine. I'm pleased to welcome you on behalf of the Dan David Foundation to this conference, and I applaud the determination with which our partners at Tel Aviv University have put together this event, despite the extremely difficult days that Israel and the university are going through. Although it was planned more than a year ago under very different circumstances, the topic of this conference remains absolutely timely and even more urgent, as you just heard from President Porat. Reflecting on the title of the conference, Shades of Democracy and Authoritarianism, Historical and Contemporary Perspectives, I thought that I could offer you two perspectives of my own, even though they are more personal than academic. The first one is that of my father, the late Dan David, founder of the foundation that carries his name. He was born in 1929 in Bucharest and was raised in Romania. He survived both fascist and communist persecution, and basically for the first 30 years of his life wished only to escape the shadow of authoritarianism and join the free world, which he was able to do only in 1960. I remember how when we used to visit Tel Aviv University, he would contrast his youth in communist Romania with the atmosphere he witnessed on the very same campus where this conference is now taking place. He would say that in Romania, everything was gray. That's how he described it. The oppression, the fear, and the misery drained even the color from people's faces. In Tel Aviv, he would always say he only saw color in the buildings, the flowers, and above all, in the diverse body of faculty and students that populate the campus. And moving on to my own perspective, I remember how I felt, though I was only 9 years old in November 1989, when the Berlin Wall fell. Growing up with my father's stories, I had inherited a deep fear of authoritarian regimes and a love for democracy, for the dream of a united Europe and the free world. Remember this day because you will tell your children about it, my dad told me with tears in his eyes as we watched people dancing and celebrating on the wall, on the Berlin Wall. And I do remember that night, and I remember the joy and the optimism we all felt in those days. And we never could have imagined that within a few decades, the democratic order that seemed to triumph in the last years of the 20th century would find itself in such a deep crisis, under siege practically in every country from within and without. A world that seemed, perhaps too optimistically, destined for peace and cooperation is now mired again in war, jingoism, extremism, corruption, and lies, with new forms of authoritarian power on the rise. And I cannot begin to explain to myself how this process occurred, but I do believe, as did my father, that we cannot begin to decode our world, our present, without understanding our past. And that is why today, in this time of crisis, the role of historians is more crucial than ever. And so are the talks and discussions that we will participate in the next few days. I hope that these discussions will be fruitful and that we will all emerge, if not with a solution, but at least with a glimmer of greater understanding of this complex and troubled world. Thank you very much.
Someone forgot. I was so much occupied with the current situation. Just to mention that Ariel David, you all know Ariel David. First of all, he's a great supporter of the university for quite a long time. And in particular, his support of the School of History is really amazing and so important for us, especially these days when, you know, humanities is kind of in all over the world, right? I'm not talking necessarily about this university, but, you know, humanities in general is under crisis, and it's so important that someone that like Ariel David supports the Faculty of Humanities in general and the School of History in particular, and also the new shape of the Dan David, very prestigious Dan David Prize, indicates very clearly what are the values promoted, you know, in the past by Dan David and now by Ariel. So thank you, Ariel, for what you do for us and for Israel. And let's hope that the future would be better, and we will all continue with those efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, Ariel. Thank you so much.
Thank you, the two Ariels, and thank you, Ariel David, of course. And last, but certainly not least, I invite the Dean of the Faculty of Humanities, Professor Gali Cinamon, to.
Thank you. Shalom, thank you all. Dear colleagues and friends, we gather here today under the shadow of a challenging and deeply painful period. The war, which has been going for over a year, has profoundly changed our lives. Ariel, it's very difficult to find colors in our reality these days. 101 hostages remain in Gaza, and this morning begin once again with the sound of sirens and rockets hitting various regions across the country. This has been a year where our homeland changed before our eyes day by day, to the point that feeling almost unrecognized. The approaching winter shakes our hearts as we think of the many refugees whose houses were destroyed, uncertain where they will find shelters from the cold and rain. In the midst of this painful and difficult reality, it is both challenging and crucial to come together and learn. I want to express my deepest gratitude to each of you for being here, for upholding the essential role of study and gathering in community, even during these times of profound hardship. I would like to thank you again for the Ariel and Dan David family for the long-standing, enriching partnership and friendship. These collaborations stand as a shining example of meaningful partnership, one that strengthens the humanities and contribute to the Israeli society. There is no doubt that humanities play a crucial role in advancing democracies, especially in times of war and deep internal cleavages and divisions. Rigorous, multidimensional historical knowledge provides a solid foundation for critical understanding current society's processes. It enables us to deep and inform humanistic perspective that is deeply needed. The study of history offers us a unique vantage point to understand the complexities of democracies, the struggle, achievements, and conditions necessary for their sustainability. By reflecting on historical events, we can better navigate the present and imagine future rooted in justice and equality. However, this knowledge cannot remain confined in the halls of academia. It must be accessible for the broader public, and these educational processes must begin long before university. Universities must serve a bridge between academic inquiry and societal needs, especially now we bear the responsibility to use our knowledge to empower communities, foster dialogue, and support democratic principles. This is not merely an academic exercise. It is our moral obligation. Furthermore, this educational process must start within the public school system, a system that must be committed to fostering humanistic values and committed to democracy. Sadly, we have neglected this system far too long. The Israeli education system needs humanistic leaders, educators who are graduates from our faculty, from other humanities faculties, who can lead it toward value-based education and democracy society. Recognizing this process need, here at Tel Aviv University under the leadership of Professor Ariel Porat, we offer teaching certificate studies free of charge. Moreover, to nurture the next generation of leaders, we are launching a new excellent program in the faculty in the next semester. This program will cultivate the future leaders of research and societal change grounded in humanistic foundation. The program will enable talented students to complete both bachelor and master degree in 4 years. I see them as the promising future of our society. The faculty community has a tradition of making academic knowledge accessible for the wider public. We did so during the pandemic through short educational videos, during the struggle for the judge system, for the law system, and now through the initiative addressing the hostages and the realities of the war. These are vital academic actions that reflect our commitment not only to generate and create new knowledge, but also fostering democratic society. These are sad and painful days, yet We do not have the luxury of despair. It is our duty to act, using every tool and avenue available to advance the Israeli democracy built on humanistic values. Despite the difficulties we face, this gathering today is an act of hope from my perspective. It demonstrates our belief in the power of knowledge, dialogue, and collective action to shape a better future. Together, we will make a better world. Enjoy this conference, and thank you for being here. And thank you again, Ariel, for your partnership through the years. Thank you, Ofra.
Thank you, Gali.
Thank you all for your great words and greetings. So we are opening this meeting in a very bad historical moment in this region, as we all heard. The last 2 years or so have been tearing apart our already fragile society. The declaration of general judicial or legal reform in January 2023 has provoked an unprecedented social protest, which focused on the risks for democracies that this so-called reform was about to bring. Indeed, this was, of course, the background for setting the theme for this conference. The ferociously violent, devastating, and shocking terror Hamas attack of October 7th, 2023 has brought the massive protest to a halt. However, the ongoing war that followed this terrible attack certainly did not stop the processes of moral deterioration as much as it has not stopped the processes of de-democratization. Only last week, the International Criminal Court issued arrest warrants for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant on suspicion of committing war crimes in the Gaza Strip. This ruling has met in Israel an unsurprising and automatic, almost consensual rejection, describing the ICC ruling as anti-Semitic. Obviously, I'm not going to expand on this issue, and I'm sure that many of you do not agree with me, but anyway, however, I bring it here as one more little indication, not little, important indication to the processes that the Israeli society, which since October 7th has been overwhelmed by grief, despair, and revenge, has gone through. I want to note how, with the support of the vastly patriotic national media, the Israeli Jewish society has sadly become almost blind to what has happened across the fence during this devastating year that has passed since the atrocities of October 7th. As I see it, one of the main goals of this meeting is to widely open the eyes for the blind people and for the others. I enthusiastically look forward to hearing renowned experts' accounts and critical analysis of a variety of historical periods and geographical or global locations, so that we can all learn and jointly debate about the history and fate of democracy and the fate of the world we live in. Before handing the stage to my colleague Roni Parchak to introduce our first keynote speaker, Professor Dibesh Anand, I wish to thank those without whom this meeting would not have been possible. Ariel David and the Dan David Foundation has allowed us to host the conference in this nice setting. I'm really sorry, Ariel, that I don't know where to look at you, you would not be able to join us for the coffee breaks and the meals at the nice museum terrace, pending on the weather and other conditions here. I want to deeply thank the organizing committee who have together contemplated the program and have shared many moments of anxiety and perplexity. Irit Bak, Liora Handelman Bavur, Dina Moyal, Roni Parchak, and Raanan Ryan, who began the process with us. Thanks are also due to our great and reliable PhD students, Matan David, Anya Juravel-Segal, and Yossi Edri, who will support this meeting also as it will unfold in the next few days. I thank all the participants in the meeting, both afar and in location, who agreed to join us in this quest for understanding, critical thinking, reflection about highly significant questions. And last but by no means least, I wish to express my deep gratitude, where are you? To my two wonderful collaborators at the school's office. They are not here. Are you here? Oh, they're gone. Okay, it is recorded. The wonderful collaborator at the school's office, Gali and Li Chen, without whom I personally and all of us here would have not been standing here and opening this meeting.